My name is Judith Parker, a 30-year-old attorney from Boston, facing the most important case of my life against my own father. The courtroom fell silent as I watched him exchange knowing glances with Judge Wilson, their smirks, confirming what I already suspected. They thought they had won before we even began. What they did not know was that 3 days ago, I had discovered something hidden in my late mother, Eleanor's antique desk, that would shatter their confidence forever. If you are watching this and want to know how I brought down two powerful men with just 4 whispered words, let me know where you are watching from. Hit subscribe and stay until the very end. Growing up as the daughter of Thomas Parker meant living in 2 different worlds. To the public, my father was a respected defense attorney who represented high-profile clients across Massachusetts. His name appeared in legal journals, and his firm occupied the top 3 floors of a gleaming downtown Boston skyscraper. But behind our colonial homes, heavy oak doors in Cambridge, he was a controlling man who micromanaged every aspect of our lives. My mother, Eleanor, was the opposite of my father, where he was loud and demanding. She was quiet but resolute. She had this incredible ability to stand her ground without raising her voice. I remember countless dinners where he would rant about his cases or criticize my grades, while she would simply meet my eyes across the table, her silent support keeping me afloat. "Your father wants what is best for you," she would tell me later. "He just has a different way of showing it." But even as a child, I could see the strain in her smile. Their marriage began deteriorating visibly when I turned 16. The arguments became more frequent, no longer hidden behind closed doors. Father stayed at the office later each night. Mother started volunteering at the local library, finding reasons to be away from home. The tension was so thick you could feel it pressing against your skin whenever they occupied the same room. It was during my junior year of high school when I accidentally discovered the reason for the growing distance. I had stopped by his office after school to pick up concert tickets he had promised to get for me. His secretary was away from her desk, so I knocked lightly on his door. When no one answered, I pushed it open slightly, thinking he might be on a call. Instead, I saw my father with Jennifer, his 26-year-old legal assistant. They sprang apart when the door creaked, but not before I had seen enough to understand exactly what was happening. Father smoothed down his tie, while Jennifer hurriedly gathered papers from the floor. "Judith, you should have waited outside," he said, his tone more annoyed than embarrassed. "We were just reviewing case files." I said nothing, turned around and walked out. That night, I told my mother what I had seen. She simply nodded as if confirming something she had long suspected. "I'm sorry you had to see that, sweetheart," she said, hugging me tightly. 2 weeks later, she filed for divorce. That was when I truly saw the extent of my father's ruthlessness. He seemed to take the divorce as a personal affront, an unforgivable challenge to his authority. He used every legal maneuver possible to punish my mother for daring to leave him. The divorce proceedings were brutal. Father contested everything from the division of assets to custody arrangements. Even though I was nearly 17, he mysteriously produced documentation showing that he had paid for everything in our lives. That mother had contributed nothing to the family finances. He claimed she was emotionally unstable and incapable of managing money. What made it worse was how he leveraged his connections within the legal community. Judges he had golfed with for years suddenly presided over critical hearings. Evidence my mother submitted would mysteriously get filed incorrectly. Her first attorney withdrew from the case after receiving a lucrative job offer at a firm connected to my father. By the time the divorce was finalized, my mother received only a fraction of what she deserved after 20 years of marriage. She got a small settlement that barely covered the down payment on a modest 2-bedroom house in a less desirable neighborhood. Meanwhile, Father kept the Cambridge home, the vacation property in Cape Cod, and nearly all their investments. Mother never complained. She found work as an administrative assistant at a local community college and slowly rebuilt her life. She encouraged me to maintain a relationship with my father, though I found it increasingly difficult as I watched him thrive while she struggled. I went to Northwestern University for college, studying pre-law, despite my father's insistence that I major in business. He threatened to cut financial support, but I had secured scholarships and was willing to take loans rather than bend to his will. This defiance created another fracture in our already strained relationship. During my undergraduate years, I only saw him during mandatory holiday dinners, which were tense affairs filled with passive-aggressive comments about my choices. He had by then married Jennifer, who awkwardly tried to connect with me 14 years her junior, and fully aware of how their relationship had begun. Meanwhile, my relationship with my mother deepened. She never used me as a pawn or spoke ill of my father. Instead, she focused on rebuilding her life and supporting my independence. We spoke weekly, and I spent summers with her rather than at father's house. 3 years ago, while I was establishing my career at a small public interest law firm in Chicago, mother called with devastating news. She had been diagnosed with stage 4 ovarian cancer. The prognosis was grim, giving her perhaps a year with aggressive treatment. I did not hesitate. I arranged a leave of absence from my job and moved back to Boston to be with her. Those final months were both heartbreaking and precious. As the cancer weakened her body, she seemed to grow stronger in spirit. We had long conversations about life forgiveness and finding peace. Not once did she express bitterness about her circumstances or the way my father had treated her. Life is too short to carry around anger, she told me one evening as we watched the sunset from her small porch. I have had a good life, Judith. I have you. And that has been my greatest joy. She passed away peacefully 6 months ago, with me holding her hand. She left me everything she had, which was modest but meaningful. Her small house savings of about $60,000 in family heirlooms passed down through generations of her family. Most precious among these was her mother's antique mahogany desk, which had always held a place of honor in every home she lived in. At the funeral, I was shocked to see my father and Jennifer arrive just as the service was beginning. He had not visited mother once during her illness, claiming busy court schedules and important cases. Yet here he was dressed impeccably in a black suit, expressing condolences to people he had not spoken to in years. After the service, he approached me as I stood receiving condolences from mother's friends and colleagues. "Judith, I'm sorry for your loss," he said formally, as if we were mere acquaintances. "Your mother was a good woman." I thanked him stiffly, wanting him to leave so I could grieve in peace. Then he added something that sent a chill through me. "We should discuss the estate soon. I have concerns about Eleanor's mental state in her final months. The medication, it affects decision EM." Before I could respond, he handed me his business card and walked away, leaving me stunned by his implication. It was only later that I understood what he was doing. My father was laying groundwork to contest the will to take even the little that mother had managed to build after the divorce. This was the beginning of a nightmare that would consume the next 6 months of my life. A legal battle that would reveal secrets neither of us could have imagined. 2 weeks after the funeral, I received formal notice that the will would be read at the office of mother's attorney, Harold Green. I arrived early, composing myself in the reception area of the small law practice. Father arrived precisely on time, accompanied by Gerald Thompson, a shark-like attorney known for aggressive probate litigation. The reading itself was straightforward. Mother had left everything to me with specific mentions of family heirlooms, and her wish that I use the modest inheritance to build a life filled with purpose and joy. Her will had been properly executed and witnessed 6 months before her diagnosis, when she was undeniably of sound mind. As Harold finished reading, Father cleared his throat. "I will be contesting this will," he announced, as Thompson handed Harold a thick folder of documents. My former wife was not mentally competent to make these decisions. Furthermore, I have evidence that significant assets in her possession were acquired during our marriage and were incorrectly distributed during the divorce settlement. Harold appeared surprised but maintained his professional demeanor. "Of course, Mr. Parker, you have the right to contest. But I should inform you that Eleanor anticipated this possibility and ensured all documentation was in perfect order." My father merely smiled. "We will let the court decide, shall we?" I left the meeting feeling blindsided and angry. Mother had warned me that father might try something, but I had dismissed her concerns as overly cautious. Now I realized she had known him better than I did. The next day, I contacted Sarah Goldstein, a former law school classmate who specialized in probate law. After reviewing the case, she reassured me that father's claims were baseless. "Your mother's will is solid," Sarah said, flipping through the documents. He has no grounds to claim mental incompetence without medical evidence, which does not exist. And reopening the divorce settlement after all these years would require extraordinary circumstances. Her confidence made me feel better until she checked the case assignment and frowned. "Judge Wilson," she murmured, her expression changing. "Do you know if your father has connections with him?" "I am not sure," I said. "Why?" Sarah hesitated. "Walter Wilson and your father have history. They attended law school together at Harvard, belong to the same country club, and I believe they have investment properties together." My stomach dropped. "Is that not a conflict of interest?" "It absolutely is," she agreed. "We will file a motion for recusal immediately." Our first court appearance confirmed my worst fears. Judge Wilson, a stern-faced man in his early 60s, barely acknowledged Sarah when she spoke, but gave Thompson his full attention. When Sarah attempted to present our documentation, Wilson interrupted repeatedly with trivial questions. When Thompson presented father's claims without evidence, Wilson nodded appreciatively. As we left the courtroom, Sarah was visibly frustrated. "This is worse than I expected. Wilson is not even pretending to be impartial." We filed a motion for Wilson to recuse himself, due to his personal and financial connections with my father. The emergency hearing for this motion was scheduled quickly, which initially seemed promising. That hope vanished when Wilson himself presided over the hearing. He dismissed our motion with barely concealed annoyance. "I have known Thomas Parker for 30 years, yes, but I can assure this court that I am perfectly capable of rendering impartial judgment in this case." Motion denied. The following weeks became increasingly surreal. Information discussed in chambers somehow reached father's team before we had even returned to the office. Witnesses who had agreed to testify about mother's mental clarity suddenly became unavailable. Judge Wilson approved every motion filed by Thompson while finding technical reasons to deny ours. Sarah grew more frustrated with each setback. After a particularly disastrous hearing where Wilson allowed father's team to introduce clearly inadmissible evidence, she suggested we consider settling. "Judith, I hate to say this, but we are fighting a stacked deck," she admitted as we sat in her office. "Wilson is never going to rule in our favor. Your father is willing to spend whatever it takes to win. Maybe we should consider offering a compromise to preserve at least part of your inheritance." "No," I said firmly. "This is not just about money. It is about honoring my mother. She fought him once and lost because of his connections. I will not let that happen again." Sarah nodded, her respect evident. "Then we keep fighting, but be prepared for this to get uglier." She was right. The discovery phase became a nightmare as father's team demanded excessive documentation about every aspect of mother's life. They requested financial records going back 20 years, medical records from every doctor she had ever seen, and personal correspondence that had no relevance to the case. Judge Wilson approved all these requests, forcing us to spend countless hours gathering materials that Thompson would then claim were incomplete or insufficient. It was a deliberate strategy to drain our resources and exhaust our will to fight. Meanwhile, mother's friends, who had agreed to testify about her mental clarity during her final months, began receiving strange calls. Martha, her closest friend, called me in tears after someone contacted her employer, questioning her integrity. Another witness found her car tires slashed the day before her scheduled deposition. During my own deposition, father sat across the table, looking smug, as Thompson questioned me for 8 grueling hours about mother's medication, her daily routines, and conversations we had during her illness. They were fishing for any statement that could be twisted to suggest confusion or manipulation on my part. "Did you suggest the changes to her will?" Thompson asked repeatedly, though the will had been drafted years before her illness. "Did you ever administer her medication yourself?" he questioned, implying I might have deliberately over-medicated her. Through it all, father watched with a slight smile, occasionally whispering to Thompson when he wanted a particular line of questioning pursued. Not once did he meet my eyes directly. By the 4th month of litigation, I was emotionally exhausted and nearly depleted financially. The legal fees were mounting, and each court appearance seemed more futile than the last. Wilson had made his bias so obvious that even the court reporter raised eyebrows at some of his rulings. "We need to be realistic," Sarah told me after another devastating day in court. "Given the judge, we are likely to lose everything. Wilson will not only uphold your father's challenge, but he will probably award legal fees against you as well. You could end up owing your father money when this is all over." "What options do we have?" I asked, feeling the weight of impending defeat. "Very few," she admitted. "We have preserved all objections for appeal, but appeals are expensive and time-consuming. And given your father's connections, I cannot guarantee a different outcome at the appellate level." I left her office that evening feeling completely defeated. The final hearing was scheduled for the following week, and all signs pointed to a total loss. My father would succeed in taking everything Mother had worked so hard to rebuild after their divorce. Even worse, he would win because the system was rigged in his favor, not because he was right. That night, I sat in Mother's small living room, looking around at the modest home that had brought her so much peace. This might be one of the last times I would be here. Soon, it would likely belong to my father, who would probably sell it without a second thought. The unfairness of it all brought me to tears. I had fought as hard as I could, but how could anyone win against opponents who controlled the playing field itself? Little did I know that everything would change because of what I would discover that very night. With the final hearing approaching and defeat seeming inevitable, I decided to spend the evening at Mother's house, possibly for the last time. I wanted to take some personal mementos before potentially losing access to the property. Though Sarah had advised me not to remove anything substantial while litigation was pending, surely no one would object to me taking photographs and small keepsakes. I moved from room to room, touching furniture Mother had carefully selected, smelling the lingering scent of her favorite lavender sachets in the linen closet. In her bedroom, I carefully packed her jewelry box containing more sentimental than valuable pieces, a hand-knitted scarf she had made during her chemotherapy sessions, and a few books from her nightstand. The antique mahogany desk in the small home office was my final stop. This desk had been a fixture throughout my childhood, passed down from my grandmother. Mother had always treated it with special care, polishing its surface weekly and using a special key to lock its drawers. I had already cleared most of its contents during initial preparations for the case. The drawers contained typical items, ordinary paperwork, stationery, and office supplies. I was simply wiping down its surface when my cloth caught on something underneath. Curious, I got down on my knees and examined the underside of the desk. There, almost invisible, unless you were looking for it, was a small wooden knob. When I pulled it, a panel slid open, revealing a hidden compartment I had never known existed. Inside was a sealed manila envelope, yellowed with age and secured with a faded red string. My hands trembled slightly as I carefully opened it. The contents made little sense at first glance. A collection of official-looking documents with government seals, several black and white photographs, and a small leather-bound journal. The documents appeared to be military records, specifically naval intelligence, dated from the late 1980s. I was shocked to see my mother's name, Eleanor Marie Kessler, her maiden name, listed as a communications specialist with a high-security clearance. Mother had never mentioned serving in the military, always telling me she had worked administrative jobs before meeting father. The photographs showed a younger version of my mother in naval uniform, standing with a group of serious-looking people outside what appeared to be a government building. With a jolt, I recognized two of the men standing beside her, much younger versions of my father and Judge Wilson. The journal provided the most startling revelations. In neat handwriting dated June 1987 through March 1989, Mother documented her work in naval intelligence. She had been part of a specialized communications team supporting classified operations. The entries were careful not to reveal operational details, but expressed increasing ethical concerns. One passage from October 1988 caught my attention. T&W have expanded surveillance beyond authorized targets. When I questioned the legality, T said, "National security supersedes conventional constraints. I am uncomfortable with the direction this has taken, but feel powerless to object further without risking my position and possibly more." T&W Thomas and Walter, my father and Judge Wilson. I continued reading, my heart racing, as the journal revealed a story Mother had kept hidden her entire life. She had met my father during their service, where both he and Wilson were legal advisors attached to intelligence operations. An operation named Kingfisher seemed particularly significant, mentioned repeatedly with growing concern. The final entries described her decision to leave the service. March 15, 1989. I can no longer participate in what K has become. The original mission had merit, but what T and W have done crosses lines I cannot accept. I have secured copies of key communications as insurance should they ever come after me. The verification code Autumn Sentinel would prove my involvement and knowledge. I pray I never need to use it. I sat on the floor surrounded by these papers, trying to process what I had discovered. My mother, the quiet administrative assistant, had once been a naval intelligence specialist. She had worked with my father and Judge Wilson decades before I was born, and something had happened during an operation called Kingfisher that had troubled her enough to keep evidence as insurance. This explained why she had never fought harder during the divorce. She had this leverage, but chose not to use it. But why? And what exactly had happened during Operation Kingfisher? The journal mentioned a Barbara Linden as a trusted colleague. After some searching online, I found a Barbara Linden living in a suburb north of Boston, who was approximately the right age. I called the number listed, and a cautious voice answered. When I mentioned my mother's name, there was a long pause. Eleanor has passed, I explained. I am her daughter, Judith. I know who you are, Barbara replied quietly. Your mother spoke of you often. I am very sorry for your loss. We arranged to meet the following day at a small coffee shop. Barbara arrived early, a trim woman in her 60s with alert eyes that scanned the room continuously. She seemed nervous, choosing a table in the corner with her back to the wall. I was surprised to get your call, she said, after we had ordered coffee. Eleanor and I kept in touch, but we rarely spoke of the old days. I found her journal, I said directly, and documents about her time in naval intelligence, about Operation Kingfisher, and my father and Judge Wilson. Barbara's cup froze halfway to her lips. She carefully set it down, her expression guarded. What exactly did you find? I explained about the hidden compartment and the contents of the envelope. With each detail, Barbara grew more tense. Why did you contact me? She finally asked. I need to understand what happened. My father is contesting Mother's will, and Judge Wilson is presiding over the case. There are clear signs of collusion, and I am about to lose everything Mother left me. Barbara glanced around the coffee shop before leaning forward. Your mother left that life behind deliberately. She never wanted you to know about it. I understand that I insisted, but I need to know now. What was Operation Kingfisher? What did my father and Wilson do that concerned her so much? After a long hesitation, Barbara spoke in a low voice. It started as legitimate surveillance of suspected foreign operatives on American soil. Your father and Wilson were legal counsel, ensuring operations remained within guidelines, but they became ambitious. Ambitious how they expanded the surveillance to include Americans, politicians, business leaders, judges, people with influence. The information they gathered was not used for national security, but for personal advancement. She paused. Your mother was the communication specialist. All transmissions went through her. She saw everything but was sworn to secrecy, and she kept evidence I prompted. Barbara nodded grimly as insurance. When she decided to leave, they threatened her, said she would be prosecuted for betraying her country. She let them know she had documentation that would implicate them both. A standoff of sorts. But what specifically did they do that was so wrong? Barbara's expression darkened. There was an incident surveillance that went too far. A civilian who died under questionable circumstances. The official record says it was unrelated, but your mother knew otherwise. Their actions directly led to that death, and they covered it up. She reached for her purse. I have said too much already. These men are dangerous when threatened, Judith. Be very careful. Before leaving, she wrote a name and address on a napkin. Commander Phillips, retired now. He was in charge before he was pushed out. He knows more than I do, but he is not easy to find and does not trust easily. Finding Phillips proved challenging. The address led to an old apartment building where he had not lived for years. After days of research and calls to various veterans organizations, I finally located him living under a slightly altered name in a remote area of Vermont. With the final hearing just days away, I made the 3-hour drive north following increasingly narrow roads until I reached a small cabin surrounded by dense pine forest. A weathered man with a military bearing answered my knock, his expression unwelcoming. Commander Phillips, I asked, Have not been called that in a long time, he replied cautiously. Who are you? Judith Parker, Eleanor Kessler's daughter. His eyes widened slightly, the only indication that the name meant something to him. Eleanor passed 6 months ago, I added. After a moment's hesitation, he stepped back. You better come in. The interior of Philip's cabin was sparse, but meticulously organized, much like the man himself. Bookshelves lined with military history and technical manuals occupied one wall, while topographic maps covered another. He gestured toward a simple wooden chair while he remained standing, evaluating me with sharp eyes. Why are you here? He asked without preamble. I found documents my mother kept about her time in naval intelligence. I replied directly about Operation Kingfisher and the roles my father Thomas Parker and Judge Walter Wilson played. Philip's expression remained neutral, but I noticed his posture stiffen slightly. I have no idea what you are talking about. I think you do, I countered, reaching into my bag and carefully extracting the photographs. I placed them on the small table between us. My mother is here, so are you, along with my father and Judge Wilson. He glanced at the photographs without touching them, his face giving nothing away. Many people served together, proves nothing. I removed the journal next, opening it to the final entry. She mentioned you specifically said you were pushed out when you questioned their methods. His eyes flickered with the first genuine emotion I had seen, a brief flash of old anger quickly suppressed. Your mother was a good woman, he said finally, one of the few with real integrity. If she kept those records, she had good reason. He paused, studying me carefully. What do you want from me? The truth. My father is using his connection with Judge Wilson to steal my inheritance. I need to understand what happened during Operation Kingfisher that gave my mother leverage against them. Phillips remained silent, weighing his options. Finally, he sighed heavily and sat down across from me. Does the phrase Autumn's Sentinel mean anything to you? I asked when he did not speak. The effect was immediate. His head snapped up, eyes suddenly alert and focused. Where? Did you hear that? It was in Mother's journal. She called it a verification code that would prove her involvement and knowledge. Philip stood abruptly and moved to a cabinet in the corner. He returned with 2 glasses and a bottle of whiskey, pouring generous amounts into both. He pushed one toward me before taking a long swallow from his own. Operation Kingfisher began in 1987. He started his voice low, as if the walls might be listening. Official mission was monitoring suspected foreign agents operating through diplomatic covers. Standard counterintelligence, all perfectly legal with proper warrants and oversight. He took another drink. Your father and Wilson were assigned as legal advisors to ensure operations remained within guidelines. Smart, ambitious men with security clearances and political connections. Your mother handled encrypted communications logging and distributing intelligence reports through secure channels. Philip stared into his glass as he continued. About 6 months in, surveillance targets expanded, not through official channels, but through Parker and Wilson's initiative. They began gathering information on prominent Americans, people with influence, judges, politicians, business leaders. For what purpose? I asked. Advancement, he said simply. Blackmail, though they would never call it that. Leveraging, compromising information to secure favors, positions, investments. They were building networks of influence. How did they get away with it? Carefully, they controlled the legal oversight and manipulated the reporting channels. I began to suspect something when resource allocations did not match official operations. When I questioned them, I was reassigned within weeks. Your mother remained because they needed her technical expertise. He refilled his glass. By early 1989, they had established quite a system. Then came the incident that finally crossed the line. Philip's voice grew even quieter. A journalist started investigating government surveillance programs. Getting too close to uncovering Kingfisher, Parker and Wilson directed assets to monitor him. An American citizen without warrants. During what was supposed to be a simple break-in to copy his notes, something went wrong. The journalist confronted them and ended up dead fall down a staircase, officially ruled accidental. I felt a chill run through me. They killed someone, not directly, but they ordered the operation that resulted in his death, then covered it up. Used their influence to ensure the investigation went nowhere. Phillips looked at me directly. Your mother handled the communications for that operation. Saw the real reports, not the sanitized versions that went into official records. She kept copies as insurance, I murmured. Remembering the journal entry. Exactly. When she decided to leave the service, they threatened her. Standard procedure would be prosecution for mishandling classified information. But your mother let them know she had documentation that would expose everything. Mutually assured destruction. Then why did she not use it during the divorce? I asked. My father destroyed her financially, used his connections to manipulate the proceedings. Philip smiled sadly. That was Eleanor. She told me once that using the information would hurt too many innocent people. The fallout would go beyond just your father and Wilson. And perhaps she was protecting you too from knowing the truth about your father. What exactly would this information prove today? I asked. The statute of limitations has expired on many of the lesser violations, Phillips acknowledged, but not on the death cover-up. That would still be prosecutable. At minimum, it would end their careers and destroy their reputations. At worst, criminal charges, the call sign, Autumn Sentinel. What exactly does it mean? It was the verification code for the secure communication logs of Operation Kingfisher. Only those directly involved would know it. It was never documented in official records to maintain compartmentalization. Phillips leaned forward, suddenly intense. Listen carefully. Those logs still exist in a secured government facility. Anyone speaking that code who should not know it would trigger immediate security protocols. The code itself is proof of insider knowledge. He wrote something on a slip of paper. These are authentication phrases that would convince them you have access to the full records. Details only someone with the complete logs would know. I took the paper, hope rising for the first time in months. Will this be enough to force them to back down? Possibly. These men built careers on the foundation of those secrets. The threat alone might be sufficient. His expression grew grim. But understand what you are doing. This information is still technically classified. Using it could have consequences for you as well. I do not care, I said firmly. They have left me no choice. Phillips nodded with reluctant approval. Your mother would be proud. She had the same steel in her spine. He hesitated. Be careful how you use this. Suggest rather than explicitly state. Let them fill in the blanks with their own guilty knowledge. I drove back to Boston with my mind racing, both exhilarated and terrified by what I had learned. That evening, I met with Sarah to prepare our strategy for the final hearing. Her eyes widened as I explained what I had discovered, carefully omitting classified details while conveying the leverage we now possessed. This is explosive, she whispered, but also dangerous. If you publicly reveal classified information, even in court, you could face serious consequences. Phillips suggested implying, rather than stating explicitly. I explained just enough to let them know we have the information without actually disclosing classified details. Sarah nodded slowly. That might work. We can prepare alternate strategies. First, we proceed with our legitimate legal arguments. If Wilson continues his bias and it becomes clear we are losing, then you can indicate your knowledge as a last resort. We spent hours preparing both approaches, though. Sarah remained concerned about potential backlash. Are you sure you want to risk this? Once you open this door, there is no closing it. I am sure, I replied. My mother protected these men for years at great personal cost. She chose not to use this information even when they hurt her. But I will not make the same choice. Not when they are trying to take even the little she managed to rebuild. That night, I sat alone in Mother's living room, surrounded by her modest possessions. I wondered if she had made the right choice, keeping these secrets. Had her silence protected me, or just protected men who did not deserve protection? I would never know for certain why she made the choices she did. But tomorrow I would make my own. Whatever happened in that courtroom, nothing would ever be the same again. The morning of the final hearing dawned clear and cold. I dressed carefully in a conservative navy suit, pulling my hair back into a neat bun. My hands trembled slightly as I fastened Mother's simple pearl earrings, the only jewelry she had worn regularly. Looking in the mirror, I saw determination in my eyes, replacing the defeat that had been there for months. Sarah arrived early to review our strategy one last time. She had prepared extensive documentation challenging Father's claims and highlighting the numerous procedural irregularities throughout the case. We both knew these arguments would likely fall on deaf ears, but establishing a clear record was essential, especially if we needed to appeal. Remember, Sarah cautioned, we only use your information as an absolute last resort. Let us see how Wilson handles our legitimate legal arguments first. We arrived at the courthouse to find several reporters gathered outside. Apparently, the contentious nature of the case had attracted local media attention, something my father typically cultivated but might now regret. Father and Thompson arrived moments later, both looking confident in expensive suits, followed by an entourage of junior attorneys carrying multiple briefcases. Father nodded to the reporters, clearly comfortable in the spotlight. In the courthouse waiting area, he approached us with Thompson at his side. Judith, he acknowledged coolly. I hope you have reconsidered your position. There is still time to reach a settlement that would be less public and painful for everyone. You mean less painful for you? I replied evenly. No, I have not reconsidered. Something in my tone made him study me more carefully. This pointless resistance only depletes what little your mother left you. Judge Wilson has made his perspective quite clear throughout these proceedings. Yes, he certainly has. I agreed. His bias has been remarkably transparent. Father frowned slightly at my calm demeanor. He had expected fear or resignation, not this steady confidence. Before he could respond, the bailiff called our case and we filed into the courtroom. Judge Wilson already sat at the bench reviewing documents with a stern expression. He barely glanced up as we entered, but I noticed him exchange a quick look with my father, a silent confirmation of their predetermined outcome. We will hear final arguments in the matter of Parker versus Parker, Wilson announced. Mr. Thompson, you may proceed first. Thompson approached the podium with practiced confidence. For the next 40 minutes, he presented a masterful distortion of reality, painting my mother as emotionally unstable and financially irresponsible. He claimed she had manipulated her doctors into believing she was mentally competent while making irrational decisions about her estate. Your Honor, we have testimony from multiple sources indicating Eleanor Parker's judgment was compromised during her illness, Thompson declared. Though these sources were largely people who had never met my mother during her illness, he presented fabricated evidence suggesting mother's assets rightfully belonged to my father, conveniently ignoring the divorce settlement that had already addressed these claims years earlier. Throughout Thompson's presentation, Judge Wilson nodded appreciatively, occasionally asking questions that helped strengthen their narrative. Not once did he challenge even the most outrageous assertions. When Sarah finally took her turn, the contrast was stark. Wilson interrupted her, repeatedly questioning basic facts and demanding documentation we had already submitted multiple times. When she attempted to point out inconsistencies in Thompson's arguments, Wilson cut her off. The court is well aware of the facts in this case, Counselor. Please confine yourself to relevant arguments, he said dismissively. Sarah persisted admirably, presenting our witnesses who testified to Mother's mental clarity until her final days. Dr. Susan Reynolds, Mother's oncologist, stated unequivocally that while the cancer had weakened her physically, her mental faculties remained sharp throughout treatment. In my professional opinion, Dr. Reynolds testified Eleanor Parker was fully competent to make financial and legal decisions until the very end of her life. Wilson visibly frowned at this testimony, then questioned Dr. Reynolds aggressively about the potential side effects of pain medications, clearly fishing for any possible way to discount her professional assessment. Each of our witnesses faced similar treatment, their credibility attacked by both Wilson and Thompson. Meanwhile, Father sat at his table looking increasingly smug as the hearing progressed exactly as he had expected. By mid-afternoon, my frustration had reached its peak. Sarah had presented a compelling case that would have convinced any impartial judge, but Wilson was clearly preparing to rule against us, regardless of the evidence. After the final witness, Wilson looked at his watch impatiently. I believe I have heard sufficient testimony to render judgment in this matter. Sarah stood quickly. Your Honor, my client wishes to provide testimony regarding her mother's state of mind and intentions. Wilson waved his hand dismissively. I see no need for additional testimony. The medical and expert witnesses have provided adequate information. But Your Honor, Sarah persisted as the primary caregiver during her mother's illness. Miss Parker has relevant first-hand knowledge. Counselor Wilson said, his tone hardening. This court has indulged your arguments despite their obvious deficiencies. Miss Parker's testimony would be inherently self-serving and add nothing of substance. I felt a surge of anger. As he continued, furthermore, given Miss Parker's financial interest in the outcome, her testimony would carry little weight. She is clearly too emotionally involved to provide reliable information about her mother's capacity. Thompson nodded in agreement, exchanging a satisfied glance with my father. Wilson shuffled his papers, preparing to announce his ruling. Based on the evidence presented, this court finds significant reason to question the validity of Eleanor Parker's will, particularly given her medical condition and the influence of pain medication on her decision-making capacity. Sarah stood to object, but Wilson silenced her with a sharp glare. "You are weak, Miss Parker, and your testimony is worthless," he declared, looking directly at me for the first time. "This court will not be swayed by emotional appeals when the facts clearly indicate your mother's judgment was compromised." Something snapped inside me. After months of watching this farce of justice, of seeing my mother's memory tarnished by men who had once threatened her, I could no longer remain silent. I stood slowly, my heart pounding, but my resolve firm. "Your Honor," I said clearly, "I request permission to address the court." Wilson's annoyance was palpable. "Miss Parker, I have already ruled that your testimony is unnecessary." "Nevertheless, I insist," I replied, moving toward the witness stand. The bailiff stepped forward, uncertainly looking to Wilson for direction, but hesitated at my calm demeanor. Wilson's face flushed with anger. "This is highly irregular and inappropriate. Return to your seat immediately, or I will hold you in contempt." Instead, I approached the microphone at the witness stand. A tense silence fell over the courtroom as everyone watched this unexpected confrontation. I leaned slightly forward and spoke in a clear, measured voice that carried throughout the room. "Autumn Sentinel, Operation Kingfisher." The effect was immediate and dramatic. Wilson's face drained of color, the gavel he had raised to call for order, slipping from his suddenly nerveless fingers and clattering onto the bench. At the plaintiff's table, my father half rose from his seat, his expression a mixture of shock and disbelief. "How?" Wilson stammered, his authoritative demeanor completely shattered. "How do you know that? Name?" The courtroom remained frozen in confused silence, no one else understanding the significance of those words, but everyone recognizing that something extraordinary had just occurred. "I found my mother's documentation," I said calmly. "She kept very detailed records, Your Honor, including verification codes and authenticated logs." Wilson gripped the edge of the bench, visibly struggling to regain his composure. "This is inappropriate. We need to clear the courtroom immediately." "Why?" I asked innocently. "Is there something about these terms that concerns you? Something about your history with my father that might constitute a conflict of interest in this case?" "This is outrageous," Thompson interjected, confused but sensing disaster. "Your Honor, this display is clearly intended to distract from the legitimate issues before the court." My father finally found his voice. "Judith, stop this immediately. You have no idea what you are doing." "Actually, I do," I replied, turning to face him directly. "Commander Phillips was very informative about the extent of your activities, about how you and Judge Wilson leveraged classified operations for personal gain, about the incident in March 1989 that was covered up." Wilson's face had gone from pale to ashen. "This court is in recess," he declared abruptly, his voice shaking. "Counsel will join me in chambers immediately." As Wilson practically fled the bench, pandemonium erupted in the courtroom. Reporters who had been half dozing through legal arguments were suddenly alert, sensing a major story breaking before them. The court clerk looked bewildered as she announced the indefinite postponement of proceedings. Sarah stared at me with a mixture of awe and concern. "What just happened?" she whispered as we gathered our materials. "Justice, I hope," I replied, watching my father in heated conversation with Thompson. Both men casting worried glances in my direction. For the first time since this battle began, I felt the balance of power shifting. The hunter had become the hunted, and my father's carefully constructed world was beginning to crumble around him. The hallway outside the courtroom buzzed with confusion and speculation. Reporters approached from all directions, shouting questions about what had transpired. Sarah expertly guided me through the crowd to a private conference room, closing the door firmly behind us. "That was either the most brilliant or the most reckless thing I have ever seen in court," she said. her expression a mixture of admiration and concern. What exactly did those words mean? And how did they cause such a reaction? Before I could answer, there was a sharp knock on the door. A court officer entered looking uncomfortable. "Miss Parker, your father and Mr. Thompson are requesting to speak with you immediately," he announced. Sarah stepped forward protectively. "My client will not be meeting with the plaintiff without proper legal representation." "Actually," I said, surprising both of them. "I will speak with my father, but alone, not with Thompson present." Sarah pulled me aside. "Judith, this is not advisable. Anything you say could be used against you. Trust me," I assured her. "This conversation needs to happen, and it needs to be private." After further discussion, we agreed that I would meet with my father alone in the conference room, while Sarah waited just outside the door. 10 minutes later, father entered, closing the door behind him with deliberate care. Gone was the confident, imperious man who had dominated the courtroom for months. He looked suddenly older, the lines in his face deeper than I had noticed before. "What have you done?" he asked without preamble, his voice low and controlled despite the obvious tension in his body. "I found Mother's insurance policy," I replied simply. "The one she kept to protect herself from you and Wilson." He moved to the window, staring out briefly before turning back to me. "You have no idea what you're playing with. These are matters of national security." "No," I corrected him. "They were matters of national security that you and Wilson exploited for personal gain. There is a difference." "Who have you told about this?" he demanded. "What exactly do you know?" "I know enough," I said, maintaining steady eye contact. "I know about the surveillance operations that went beyond authorized targets. I know about the journalist whose death was covered up. I know you and Wilson used information gathered illegally to build your careers and influence." Father paused slightly at the mention of the journalist. "These are dangerous accusations without context. We were operating in complex circumstances during the Cold War. Decisions were made for the greater good. Was it for the greater good when you used your influence to devastate Mother during the divorce?" I asked. "When you took everything from her because she dared to leave you? When you manipulated the legal system that you swore to uphold?" He had no immediate answer for that. After a moment, he adopted a more conciliatory tone. "What do you want, Judith?" "Money, a settlement. Name your price and we can end this today." "I want what Mother wanted," I replied. "Justice, respect for her wishes. I want you to drop all claims against her estate. Publicly acknowledge the will is valid and apologize for suggesting she was mentally incompetent." Father laughed, a short, bitter sound. "And if I refuse, you will go public with classified information, expose yourself to prosecution, destroy your own career along with mine." "If necessary," I said, without hesitation. "Mother protected you for years at great personal cost. I will not make the same choice." Something in my expression must have convinced him of my resolve. The facade of control cracked, revealing glimpses of the fear beneath. "You do not understand what it was like back then," he said, his voice dropping. "The pressure, the opportunities. It started small information that could help secure better positions, advance careers. Wilson and I were ambitious, yes, but we believed we were serving our country by putting the right people in power." "And the journalist?" I prompted when he fell silent. Father sank into a chair, suddenly looking exhausted. A miscalculation. He was getting too close to operations that needed to remain secret. The break-in was supposed to be simple intelligence gathering. No one was supposed to get hurt, but he did get hurt. "He died." "Yes," Father admitted quietly, "and afterward there was no going back. We were all implicated. Careers, reputations, freedom itself at stake. So we protected each other, buried the truth, and built your success on that foundation," I added. He did not deny it. "Your mother knew everything. She could have destroyed us at any time, especially during the divorce. I never understood why she did not." "Because she was better than you," I said simply. "She cared about more than just winning." We sat in silence for a long moment, years of tension and secrets hanging between us. "What happens now?" he finally asked. "You withdraw all claims against Mother's estate. You issue a public statement acknowledging her competence and apologizing for suggesting otherwise. You ensure Judge Wilson recuses himself from this case. And in return, the information stays buried where Mother kept it all these years." After another long silence, Father nodded slowly. I will need to speak with Wilson. Do that, I said, rising to indicate our conversation was over. But understand, this is not negotiable. By this time tomorrow, I want all claims withdrawn and a new judge assigned, or I go public with everything I have. When I rejoined Sarah in the hallway, she studied my face carefully. Did you get what you needed? I think so, I replied. We will know soon enough. We returned to the courtroom to find it in disarray. A court administrator had arrived and was speaking with the clerk. Judge Wilson was nowhere to be seen. The Honorable Judge Wilson has recused himself from this case, citing a personal conflict, the administrator announced when she noticed our return. The matter will be reassigned to Judge Caroline Martinez. A new hearing will be scheduled within 14 days. As this announcement was made, Thompson approached us looking distinctly uncomfortable. My client wishes to inform the court that he is withdrawing all claims, contesting the will of Eleanor Parker, he stated formally. We will be filing the appropriate documentation this afternoon. Sarah looked at me in amazement. Just like that, they are giving up their entire case. Just like that, I confirmed, watching my father gather his things, avoiding eye contact with everyone in the room. The following days brought a whirlwind of developments. True to his word, father filed formal documents, withdrawing all claims against mother's estate. His public statement, clearly crafted by a crisis management team, expressed deep regret for any suggestion that Eleanor Parker was anything other than fully competent, and attributed his actions to grief and misunderstanding. Judge Wilson issued a TUR statement announcing his immediate recusal from all cases involving Thomas Parker or related parties, citing previously undisclosed personal connections that could create the appearance of bias. 3 days later, he announced a medical leave of absence, which local legal commentators noted seemed suspiciously sudden. The new hearing with Judge Martinez was brief and straightforward. With no contest to the will, she quickly validated mother's wishes and released the estate to my full control. She did give me a curious look, clearly wondering what had caused such a dramatic reversal, but asked no questions. My victory should have felt more satisfying. Instead, I felt a complex mixture of relief, vindication, and unexpected sadness. The father I had once admired, despite his flaws, was revealed as someone far more compromised than I had ever imagined. The story might have ended there with a private resolution and life returning to normal. But secrets buried for decades rarely stay buried once disturbed. A week after the hearing, a political blog published a speculative piece about Judge Wilson's sudden leave of absence, connecting it to his long friendship with Thomas Parker and questioning previous cases where they had intersected. Other media outlets picked up the story, digging into their history together. Someone leaked information about their military service connection, though thankfully not the specific details of Operation Kingfisher. An enterprising journalist discovered financial links between them that should have been disclosed in numerous cases over the years. The State Bar Association opened an investigation into my father's legal practices. The Judicial Conduct Committee began reviewing Wilson's case history. Former clients and opposing parties came forward with stories of questionable rulings and suspicious coincidences. Father called me panic, evident in his voice. This was not our agreement. You promised discretion. I have been discreet, I assured him truthfully. I have spoken to no one about the specific information mother left. But you and Wilson built careers on manipulation and secrets. Did you really think it would all stay hidden once people started asking questions? Within a month, Wilson had resigned from the bench, citing health concerns but fooling no one. The Judicial Conduct Committee's preliminary findings had made his position untenable. Father's legal partners, sensing disaster, initiated proceedings to remove his name from the firm. Long-standing clients began taking their business elsewhere. His carefully constructed reputation crumbled with remarkable speed once the foundation of trust was gone. The final blow came when the district attorney's office opened an investigation into several of Father's past cases, where evidence may have been manipulated. While the statute of limitations protected him from some potential charges, his professional future was effectively over. Jennifer filed for divorce 6 weeks after the story broke, unwilling to go down with a sinking ship. The prenuptial agreement Father had insisted upon now worked against him, preserving her financial independence while his assets were increasingly tied up in legal defenses. Through it all, I maintained my silence about Operation Kingfisher and the full extent of what I had discovered. Some secrets I had come to believe were better left buried, not to protect the guilty, but to prevent unintended harm to others who might be caught in the fallout. In a strange way, Mother had been right. Using the information as leverage rather than exposure had been the wiser path. Justice had found its way to both men without requiring me to reveal classified information that might have had broader consequences. As winter turned to spring, I watched from a distance as my father's world continued to unravel. The man who had once seemed so powerful and untouchable now appeared diminished, fighting multiple legal battles with dwindling resources and support. I felt no joy in his downfall, only a sense that a long-delayed reckoning had finally arrived. Mother would not have wanted revenge, but she would have understood the importance of accountability. The system my father had manipulated for decades had ultimately turned against him, not because of explosive revelations about covert operations, but because once the first threat of corruption was pulled, the entire fabric began to unravel of its own accord. Justice, it seemed, had a longer memory than anyone had expected. 6 months after the courthouse confrontation, I sat on the small porch of Mother's house, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. The property that had nearly been taken from me had become a true home filled with both memories of Mother and new beginnings of my own. The aftermath of Wilson's resignation continued to ripple through the legal community. The Judicial Conduct Committee had completed its investigation, finding evidence of bias and improper conduct in dozens of cases. His disbarment proceedings were moving forward, his reputation in tatters. Father's law practice no longer existed. His partners had dissolved the firm rather than weather the ongoing investigations and negative publicity. He now worked alone from a small office handling minor cases for clients who could not afford more prestigious representation. The mighty Thomas Parker, once celebrated in legal circles, had been reduced to taking appointments for indigent defendants. Our relationship remained complicated. We spoke occasionally brief, awkward conversations where neither of us mentioned the past. I could not forgive what he had done to Mother, nor his attempt to take what little she had left me. Yet neither could I find satisfaction in his downfall. He was still my father, however, flawed. For my part, I had found unexpected purpose in the wake of the conflict. Using a portion of my inheritance, I established the Eleanor Parker Justice Initiative, a small foundation providing legal assistance to individuals fighting judicial misconduct and corruption. The work felt meaningful, a way to honor Mother's memory while creating something positive from the painful experience. I had also begun reconnecting with Mother's military friends, learning more about the young woman she had been before meeting my father. Barbara Linden became a regular visitor, sharing stories of their time together that revealed a side of Mother I had never known her. Quiet courage and unwavering integrity evident even then. She never wanted you to know about that part of her life. Barbara told me one evening as we sorted through old photographs. She believes some knowledge comes with burdens better not passed down. Do you think she was right to keep the secrets she did? I asked a question that had troubled me since discovering the hidden documents. Barbara considered this carefully. She protected many people, not just your father and Wilson. There were others involved in those operations. Good people who made mistakes or followed questionable orders. Exposing everything would have hurt them too. She paused. But I think she would be proud of how you handled it, using the information as leverage rather than a weapon. That perspective helped ease the complicated feelings I carried about my own decisions. I had not exposed the full truth about Operation Kingfisher, maintaining Mother's discretion while still achieving justice in our specific situation. The broader investigations now underway into Father and Wilson's careers were based on legal and ethical violations discovered afterward, not classified information from decades past. My personal life had changed too. Freed from the shadow of the court battle and my father's looming presence, I found myself developing healthier relationships. I had begun seeing Michael, a kind-hearted architecture professor I met through a community garden project. Our connection had developed slowly, built on mutual respect and shared values rather than the power dynamics that had dominated so many relationships in my life. As spring arrived, I received an unexpected letter from Commander Phillips. He had followed the news reports about Wilson's resignation and the investigations into my father's practice. You handled a difficult situation with remarkable restraint, he wrote. The easy path would have been full exposure, but you chose the harder road of measured response. Your mother made the same choice years ago. The apple, as they say, did not fall far from the tree. His words touched me deeply. Throughout my life, I had resisted comparisons to either parent, defining myself in opposition to father's controlling nature, while feeling I could never match mother's quiet strength. Now I recognize that perhaps I had inherited the best of her after all, the ability to stand firm without seeking destruction. The lessons continued to unfold as I moved forward. I learned that secrets could protect as well as harm, that justice sometimes arrived through unexpected channels, and that standing up to power required not just courage but wisdom in how that courage was applied. Most importantly, I discovered that healing did not require complete resolution of the past. My relationship with father would likely never be fully repaired. The system that had failed mother during her divorce remained imperfect despite the exposure of Wilson's corruption. Some wounds would always leave scars. Yet, I found peace in knowing I had honored mother's memory, not just by preserving her modest legacy, but by embodying the integrity she had demonstrated throughout her life. She had chosen discretion over destruction, protection over punishment, even when dealing with those who had wronged her. In my own way, facing different circumstances, I had made similar choices. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the yard, mother had tended so carefully. I felt her presence more strongly than I had since her passing. Not as a ghost or supernatural visitation, but as a continuing influence, her values and courage living on through my actions. The journey through grief, betrayal, and justice had changed me in ways I was still discovering. But sitting there in the growing twilight, I felt something I had not expected to find so soon after such conflict, a sense of being at peace with both the past and whatever the future might hold. Mother's quiet strength had guided me when I needed it most. Now it was my turn to carry that strength forward, creating justice in an imperfect world, one small act of courage at a time. What moments in your life have required you to stand up against powerful people who wronged you or someone you love? Did you find the courage to speak truth to power? Leave a comment below sharing your experience. Do not forget to like, subscribe, and share if this story resonated with you. Remember, sometimes justice comes not from shouting the loudest, but from knowing exactly when and how to speak your truth. Thank you for listening to my story, and may you find the strength to face your own challenges with courage and integrity.